I think trigger warnings are ineffectual and in many cases do more harm than good. I've seen a lot of pathological people use trigger warnings as a bludgeon against well meaning, empathetic people who are just looking for healing and a sense of community. And this side of trigger warnings is almost never discussed. Pretty much anybody who is pro trigger warning thinks of it just as being decent toward other people, being considerate toward other people. They never consider that there could ever be downsides. But one of the chief downsides is that if you've got an empathetic person who goes into a group and they are assuming the best of other people because they know themselves, they know that they have pure intentions. They are there to listen to other people. They assume other people will listen to them. They know that sometimes they act from their pain and they're not always thinking clearly, so they assume that other people are in the same place, so they extend grace to them. But they also, more often than not, come from backgrounds where they were expected to soothe their parents' emotions, where they were expected to anticipate their parents' needs, where they were expected to be mind readers and respond to things, meet needs that were never communicated to them and that never should have been put on their shoulders to begin with. You take someone like that and you put them in a community where you have a narcissist or other toxic personality type in a moderation role or high up in a social movement, and that person is going to eat the empathetic person for lunch. Because the empathetic person, if they haven't done enough healing to keep themselves centered and grounded in the wake of criticism, well, if you've got rules that allow trigger warnings to apply to a wide swath of things, then the bully can make the person that they're targeting responsible for their emotions at every juncture. And for the person who has legitimately come seeking healing, at best, this is going to stall them because it's reinforcing their childhood patterns as opposed to breaking them. And at worst, it will make those patterns worse. The other side to why I think trigger warnings are ineffectual is because I think it deepens this belief that I am my trauma and that I am fragile and that I need to be handled with care and that I cannot handle things that catch me off guard. I cannot handle things that surprise me. And there's nuance to that. I think that any reasonable person can agree that things like content warnings on media is perfectly acceptable. Even just on the basis of you don't want to waste your money, you should be able to be aware of whether or not a story contains essay, whether or not it contains themes relating to the experiences that you've had. But it's also a case where nobody can fully anticipate another person's triggers. And if you are committed to the healing process, and moreover, if you are at all magically inclined, if you're magically inclined and you work with spirits, you will be brought to the depths of your pain and discomfort, whether you like it or not, and whether you think you are prepared for it or not, somewhere along the way. Now, there's a sweet spot. If you find yourself triggered to a point that you are completely overwhelmed and you cannot get centered and you can't stop your mind from spiraling, that's going to make everything worse. That's going to reinforce the trauma. That's going to reinforce your identification with the trauma. So with certain things, again, it's completely understandable why you would want to avoid them and even why you'd want a heads up that, a discussion is going to be about that. But in any kind of genuine healing, your triggers should become less intense, and ideally they go away over time. But what I advise people is not to try and make them go away. That's not the goal. That's what Bob Ross would call a happy little accident. Because if you are gunning to make them go away, then you don't give your feelings room to breathe. And you don't give yourself the opportunity to listen to yourself and give yourself the compassion that you deserve. In terms of how we deal with each other, I think that a very large part of what we've tried to do with trigger warnings and even codes of conduct has been systematizing human relationships in order to avoid the messiness of actually conversing with one another, because there is no universal set of rules or frameworks that's going to work for every person in every context, no matter the experiences that they've had. There are people who, if they have had a certain experience, if they were to come to me and say, hey, I didn't appreciate how you handled this particular topic, and you kind of threw me in on the deep end when I wasn't expecting it, that's the sort of thing where I could hear them out on it. And if I think that their concerns are reasonable, I could apologize to them. I can alter how I do things in the future. And if I disagree with that, there's room for us to talk without demonizing one another. And if push came to shove, we can go our separate ways, but we're acknowledging each other's dignity and we're sitting in the discomfort of that conversation instead of trying to avoid it through a long list of rules, which more often than not is applied inconsistently according to whoever the favorites within a group might be. It's why in the Discord server that I've set up, in the rules that I've written, I've said flat out, we don't do trigger warnings here. But I also add, keep decorum in mind. And that's not just for the sake of the people who are reading the messages. It's also for the sake of people posting them. I think that in any kind of public forum, if you find yourself writing something or producing a video or any other form of content where you're thinking to yourself, it would be reasonable to put a trigger warning on this, that's a good time to take a step back and ask yourself, am I self-abandoning if I post this? And am I reinforcing my negative stories if I post this? Because as I say in the rules that I wrote, you never know who's going to read the things that you post publicly and how they're going to use it. You don't know, no matter how you try to cultivate your community, no matter how you try to make it a safe environment for everyone, you don't know people's true character until the chips are down. And there's a lot of things where if you share it publicly, or even if you share it privately with certain people, they will be picking it apart for ways they can use it against you at a later time. So in terms of how I approach things, it's not just down to judgment calls, it's down to mutual respect, meeting people's needs on an individual and community level, and acknowledging not all communities are for everyone, and that everyone's journey is going to be a little bit different, and the right approach for each person is going to be a little bit different, and that empathy can't be faked, and it also cannot be created where it doesn't exist by a set of rules or by trigger warnings. And the presence of trigger warnings is not going to facilitate healing in an environment where healing was already impossible. Now, I have absolutely nothing against people who decide that trigger warnings are right for them. I completely understand that there are different lines of thinking on this, and that this is just where I've arrived at, looking at all the stupidity that's out there, frankly. And the journey that I have taken, as well as what fits me best. And the communities that I've been part of that have functioned versus the ones that haven't. As always, I'm not your guru. Take this as something to chew on, not as a dictate of what you can, should, or must do. I invite discussion down in the comments. If you liked this video, leave a like, subscribe if you like the video, and share it with somebody if you think it's worth sharing. You can find me down at my website, which is in the description, watersofmemory.com, and you can find my socials, including the Discord I mentioned, in the link tree. I'm looking forward to talking to you guys next time.